Hello and welcome to the Brigham Young University Family History Library webinar series. My name is Sean Firmage. I will be your host for this webinar today. Before we start, I'd like to remind you, feel free to participate in our polls down at the bottom of your screen. If you have any suggestions as to topics you'd like to hear in the future, we'd love that you record those so we can maybe cover some of those the next month or so. Also, if you have any questions during the presentation, there will be a pod on the right-hand side of your screen. If you go ahead and type those questions in, we'll make sure that they get answered before the end of the webinar. As a reminder, our next webinar is Tuesday, June 27th. It is called Digitizing Documents, Mechanics and Methodology. That will be with James Tanner at 3 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. Today we will be pleased to hear from Kathryn Grant, who is giving a presentation titled The FamilySearch Consultant Planner for Find, Take, Teach, and Beyond. After years on the sidelines, Kathryn started doing family history and discovered, somewhat to her surprise, that she loved it. Her specialty is mentoring new family historians and helping them find success, and maybe even avoid some of the mistakes that she has made. Kathryn teaches Sunday classes at the BYU Family History Library. She also presents at Riverton Saturday seminars and other family history events. Her column on family history ran in the Nauvoo Times for about a year and is still available online. Kathryn works for the LDS Church as a technical writer with a focus on usability and process improvement. Besides family history, she loves uplifting music, thought-provoking books, and spring lilacs. All right, Kathryn, we will go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean. So everybody, thank you so much for being here. While I get this screen set up, I'm so grateful to you for taking the time to come join us today. Our webinar today is on the Amazing Consultant Planner, and I hope that as we spend this time together today, that you will see ways that this can help you in doing your own family history and also in helping other people. And actually, its main focus is to help other people. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to be covering today. In in the overview, okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is that we're going to have an introduction to the consultant planner just to kind of give an overview. And then we'll talk about how the consultant planner supports the Find, Take, Teach process. And finally, we'll touch just very briefly on a few things that you can use the planner for in addition to Find, Take, Teach. So let's go ahead and dive into our introduction. No introduction to the planner would be complete without talking about Find, Take, Teach. And I'm guessing that many of you on the webinar today are familiar with this, but just as a reminder, the Find, Take, Teach program starts, or the initiative starts, when we find a deceased family member who needs temple work. And then we take that name to the temple and we perform ordinances for the person. Then, based on our experience of knowing how to find a person and take their name to the temple, we then teach others how to do the same thing. The effectiveness, the success of Find, Take, Teach centers in my mind on its focus, which is to provide one-on-one, spirit-led, heart-turning experiences for the people that we help. So the purpose of the planner is to support us in doing that. And the way it does that, there's a couple of different ways that it helps us. First of all, it gives us easy access to the members tree. And then second, it provides some very solid help with preparing a lesson for the person that we're helping. And then finally, there's a few other miscellaneous features that we'll talk about. So first of all, let's look at how you actually access the consultant planner. There's two basic ways. One is that you can go directly to the URL, which is familysearch.org/ask/planner. Once you go there, you can bookmark that, and then it's very easy to get back. Or if your browser has autocomplete in the address bar, like mine does, you can just start typing in the address bar and it will bring up the planner, and then you can just navigate directly there. Or the other option, which is very easy, is to select Get Help at the top of pretty much any Family Search page. And when you do that, you get a drop-down menu, and then you'll have an option for helping others. And when you click that, you'll go to the same URL as if you had just clicked FamilySearch.org/ask/planner. So two easy ways to get to the consultant planner. The initial view, when you open up the consultant planner, will have kind of an introductory um, paragraph here, and then also off to the side, you'll see a kind of a control panel or navigation panel. And in this panel, if you have invited anybody to be a part of your planner, and actually that's not entirely true, that sounded wrong. What you do is you can invite people that you want to help. They don't see your planner, but you see their names on the planner, and once they're added to the planner, it gives you the ability to use the tools of the planner to help that person. So if you sign on to the planner and you notice that there's nobody that you've invited yet, let's walk through how you would invite or add a person to your consultant planner. So there's two ways to do that. One is that you would click invite person, and that essentially sends an email to the person that they have to accept before they'll appear in the planner. Or you can get certain information from the person and you can add them directly. So let's go into a little bit more detail on both of those methods. If you want to add a person, or excuse me, if you want to invite a person, the first thing you do is click invite person. And when you do, you get this form, very short form to fill out, which just asks you for the name of the person and also asks you for their email address. Once you've completed that information, you just click send. And what it does is send an email to the person very similar to the one that you see here on the screen. And it's got a big blue button in it, which they click saying yes, they would like help. When they do that, they get taken to a web page where they specifically grant permission for you as the helper to help them with their family history and have access to their family tree information. So the person that you invited would click grant permission, and then that name soon afterwards would appear on your list of people under accepted or added. So that's how you would invite a person. Let's take a look at the method for adding a person. Now, interestingly enough, you don't start out adding a person by clicking add person. You've got to get a little bit of information first, but it's very easy. So the information that you need from the person that you're helping is their username and helper number. And the way that you get that is by having the person sign into Family Tree. When they do that, they'll get their name will appear in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, and there will be a little drop-down arrow. They go ahead and click the drop-down arrow to show this drop-down, and they want to click Settings. When they click Settings, they will be taken to the account screen and they will see their username and their helper number, and then they can give you that information. When you get that information, you go back to the consultant planner and you click Add Person. And then another form pops up. This is a little bit different than the form that you saw before. They still want the first and last name of the person, but in this case, they want the helper number, which the person would have already given to you, and the username as well. Now, I should point out that you do have the option to supply the person's birth date instead of the username. So if you decided to do that, you would just click the button, the radio button next to the birth date, and you'd fill it out. But in my experience, most people nowadays really don't want to give their full birth date to somebody or have it entered in a system by somebody. And so generally, if the person's got to give you their helper number, it's just as easy for them to grab the username and give that to you. About the only time I would imagine using the birth date instead of the username is if it's a family member and you already know the birth date. But generally, I don't even ask people just because I don't want to put them in an awkward position. So I just get their helper number and their username, and when I've put in all that information, then I go ahead and click Add to Planner, and the name immediately shows up in the accepted or added section. So you might be asking yourself, well, what's the difference then? What's the advantage of one over the other? And both methods have pros and cons. When you invite the person, you have a shorter form to fill out, but because it sends an email to the person, sometimes people have lost the email or it's ended up in their spam folder or they don't get it for whatever reason. So the process can be a little glitchy there as far as the email. But the add person, the part that sometimes is a challenge for people is getting that helper number and username. So both of them have a part that may be a little bit tricky, but both of them also have their advantages because the invite person is very simple to do. And if the person gets the email, it's also fast and easy. And the add person makes it so you don't have to hassle with an email and the person shows up immediately after you add them. So, which one should you pick? Basically, it's up to you and it's up to the needs of the person that you're helping. I generally just try to do what's best for the person. And if you've already been helping them outside of the planner and you already have their username and their helper information, then add person is probably going to be faster and easier all around. But choose the one that will work best in your situation. So then, once you've got access to the person's tree, Find, Take, Teach is all about finding an area of success and helping that person find success in their first family history experience. So, how do you find an area of success? Here's a few tips that you can use. And I share these in the context of preparing a lesson because as you follow these tips, then you'll be able to prepare a good lesson for the person that you're helping. So the first thing that you want to do is prayerfully review their tree to find a good starting place. And you want to keep a couple of things in mind as you're doing that. You generally will want to choose a country that you're familiar with. You'll want to focus on the 1800s and possibly the early 1900s. And then also you'll want to choose the appropriate strategy for the person that you're helping. What do I mean by that? Well, if the person has a full tree, you'll probably want to do descendancy research. And if they have only an empty tree or a partial tree, you may have better luck focusing on ancestral. Just to make sure that we are all clear on what we're talking about when we say descendancy or ancestral, descendancy research, because it's good on a full tree, that's a method when you travel back in the person's tree. So you start with them, go to their parent, go to to a grandparent, then a great grandparent, and so forth until you get to a couple that is in approximately the early 1800s or possibly the late 1700s. Then you do a U-turn and you start tracing that couple's descendants. And so that's why they call it descendancy research. Ancestral research, on the other hand, is really good for an empty tree. For instance, perhaps a new convert who maybe only has their parents or possibly doesn't have anybody in the tree except themselves. And if that's the case, then you want to find that person's parents, then you want to find their parents and their great grandparents, so forth, moving on backwards through the tree. So that's the difference between descendancy and ancestral research in a nutshell. So how does the consultant planner help you in doing those three things, which were to choose a country you're familiar with, focus on the right time period or an easier time period, and then also use the correct strategy. Let's look at how the consultant planner helps us with that. So when you go over to the side here and you click on accepted or added, it will open up and show all the people in your list. As you click on that person, then you will see a mini fan chart over to the right-hand side. By default, the mini fan chart shows birth countries, and the color code, the legend, is right over here to the left. So you can easily see on this person's fan chart, many of their ancestors are from the United Kingdom. So that would be from England, Ireland, and Wales, and Scotland. And then some of them are from the United States. You might be asking, so why, if the Kingdom includes England, why is England included here and Ing included here? And the reason is that it looks at the actual country given on the person page for anybody in the fan chart, and then it categorizes them by that country. So if you want that to be standard, then you'd need to go into the person page. So for instance, this person right here, apparently England is listed as their country and not the United Kingdom. And so you'd go to that person page and you'd add United Kingdom, and then the person would show up as being in the United Kingdom. So that lets you see where you can focus your efforts as far as a country for the person that you're helping. What about the time period? Well, then you just go up here and you click Show Birth Years. Oops, I forgot. I was going to show you one cool thing about this is as you'll notice on this mini fan chart, there's no way to see the person's name in the little shape. There's just no way it would fit. So as you hover over the shapes, it shows this little box that gives you the name of the person, the lifespan of their lifespan, which would go from their birth date to their death date, and then also the ID number or PID, and then finally the country that's listed on their page. So as you hover over, you'll see that little box giving you the information. When you click the person, click the shape, I should say, then you will see the person card very similar to what you see in Family Tree, and then that allows you to navigate to Family Tree. So that shows you how to see the information on the people that are in the mini fan chart. Then if you want to see the birth years, you go ahead and click birth year, and these are also categorized and color coded so that you can see where you might want to focus your attention. And again, I don't recommend going back into the 1700s, especially on a starting experience, for a couple of reasons. One is that the records are less available, and they're usually they're lower quality. So it's harder to read them, it's harder to find them. They're not usually standardized. Printed forms in many countries started in the 1800s, not in the 1700s. So the records can be very free form. They don't always include the same information. So that's not to say that the 1700s is bad. It's just saying that generally when you're doing a find, take, teach, it's a person's first experience. So you're going to want to choose something that's easier for them and for you most likely. And so you want to probably focus on the 1800s and the very earliest, the late 1700s. So another advantage of this fan chart is that it shows you where people are missing. So you notice that anybody that's white, that means there's an empty space there. That means there's not anybody in the tree at that spot. So as you look at this particular fan chart, you can see that this tree is pretty full. So descendancy research is probably going to be a good strategy for this person's tree. On the other hand, if I had a lot of white in this tree, then I probably would want to consider ancestral research going back from child to parent to parent to parent to find those people that are missing from the tree. And then once I had a full tree, then I would start doing descendancy research. So there's a button here that takes you quickly to Family Tree when you're ready to go. And so after I had looked at this chart, both the birth chart and the country chart, and I'd been sincerely prayerful about it, and I seemed to feel good about a certain place, then I would go to the person's tree, the actual view in FamilySearch. The way to do that very quickly is to click Go to Tree. The difference between this, you remember that we mentioned that when you hover over somebody's shape on the tree, you'll get this little pop-up, and then when you click on it, you get the summary card. If you click the summary card, that takes you to that person in Family Tree. But if you click this View Tree button, you go to the tree view in Family Tree for the person you're helping, and they are at the root position. So that's the difference between clicking somebody on the tree and clicking Go to the tree. So next, what do we want to focus on when we actually get into Family Tree as far as finding an area of success? And again, remember, the whole purpose of doing this is to be able to have a good lesson plan for the person that you're helping. So once you're in Family Tree, there's going to be basically two possibilities for finding an area of success. The first one is that you want to look for people without spouses or children, because that way you can find people in historical records and add them to Family Tree. The other thing that you can do is keep an eye open for people in Family Tree who do not yet have ordinances. In other words, they'll have a green temple by their name, and that indicates that their ordinances have not yet been completed. What I've found is that usually focusing on the first one is a better option, and there's a couple of reasons for that, especially on a first experience. One is that I've noticed that it's a lot more exciting for somebody to add a person to family tree than to just get in the tree and have the person already be there. Another reason is that people with green temples in family tree, if they're older, in other words, if they were added maybe in the days of new family search, or added a few years ago, and they have a green temple, there's a good chance that there's a duplicate in the system, and so it actually takes a lot more research to validate a green temple name than it does to find a new person that you can just easily add to family tree. So for a first experience, I found that it's easier for the person to add somebody in addition to it being a more heart-turning experience. I don't know, there's just something about finding a person in a historical record, and then the person you're helping sees that person in a census or a birth record or whatever, then they actually type the name into family tree, and it is just a spiritual experience. It's just amazing as I've watched multiple people do that. There's such a sense of excitement and love and gratitude. So I do strongly recommend adding people to family tree if you can, just because or excuse me, having the person that you're helping add the people. You don't want to add those people ahead of time because that takes the joy away from them. But you want to prepare the information so that the person you're helping can add that person to family tree. But if you find somebody in Family Tree who doesn't have ordinances, it's definitely worth checking out. And we'll talk a little bit later about the things that you need to do to make sure that that's a valid name. So this is how I will usually go about finding an area of success when I've gotten back into Family Tree from the consultant planner. So, what I'll normally do is go to a quiet place and I will pray very sincerely and ask Heavenly Father, please, to help me find a place, a good starting place for the person that I've been assigned or have offered to help. And I also beforehand will have asked that person to pray for me. And I can tell you, brothers and sisters, I feel the effects of their prayers. I would definitely not skip that step. I would definitely ask them to pray for you as you prepare the lesson plan. So in this particular place, I had asked the person to pray with me. And as I looked at their fan chart, oh, I should say, for some reason, and this is just me, the fan chart in Family Tree tends to work best for me in finding a starting place. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's the beautiful colors, maybe it's the compact view, and other people have told me that they like other views. So this isn't right or wrong. I'm just showing you the view that seems to work best for me. But you may find that the pedigree view in Family Tree works better for you, or descendancy view. Whatever works best for you, that's what you want to use. So as I opened up the fan chart for the sister that I was helping, and I looked at it and prayed and clicked some names and just kind of looked at what country they were from and what time period and so forth, I found myself drawn towards this Abraham Chadwick. So I decided to open up his page, and I noticed that a lot of his work had been done. It turned out that he was the first convert in his family in England. And so he had done, obviously, a lot of temple work for the people in his family after he had converted to the church. So I looked around and thought, okay, doing descendancy on this is probably not going to take me very far because he's already done so much or excuse me, doing descendancy on him directly is not going to take me very far because he's already done so much of that. So I kept a prayer in my heart and thought, okay, I'm going to look at his brothers and sisters. Did any of them convert to the church? And if they didn't, then they might be a good option for doing descendancy research. So I clicked on the names and looked at the dates and so forth, and I found myself drawn to this Sarah Ann Chadwick. And so I decided to click on her name and went to her person page. As I did, again, it looked like a lot of this work was done, but again, trying to follow the spirit, I started looking at her children with her first husband, George. So I clicked on Samuel Bradbury and went over to his person page. And then I started to see some possible areas of success. For one thing, his wife only had a first name, which indicated to me that the family had probably not been researched. And then he also only had three children, which back in the 1800s was a little bit unusual unless one of the parents died. And so I looked at his family and started looking in census records and birth records and so forth. To make a long story short, come to find out that he was missing four children that I found in the census, and also he had married again. And he didn't have children with the second wife, but because he had married this second woman, we were able to get her name for temple work as well. And then I continued that again in preparation for this Find, Take, Teach lesson plan. I looked at Hannah and discovered that Hannah, who was Samuel's sister, had also married and her husband was missing, and her children were missing from family tree. So both her husband and her three children needed to be added to family tree. So when I prepared the lesson for the Find, Take, Teach experience with this sister, I made a note of all these things so that I could walk the sister through the experience that I'd gone through to find these names and then help her get those entered in family tree. So, whoops, went a little bit fast there. So I wanted to put forth a caution here, and that is that preparing a lesson plan doesn't mean just simply running a name finding app to gather Green Temple names. And the reason that I point that out is because I've run across so many people who feel that that's exactly what it does mean. And they do it with the best of intentions. Maybe someone has told them that they're supposed to do that, or they're under the incorrect perception that family tree is supposed to be a source of temple names, which it actually is not. That's not its purpose. And so people do this with the best of intentions, but the trouble is, then when people are just handed names from Green Temple hunting or name finding that may or may not be accurate, it's just not as much of a heart turning experience. So I would strongly recommend instead that if you feel so inspired to use the method that I just showed you to try and find people to add to Family Tree. Now, if you do find a Green Temple name that you feel good about and you want to check out, then there are some things that you want to look at. One is that you want to check and see how recently the name has been added. If it was added a long time ago, there's generally no problem with continuing to check the name out. But if the name was added recently, what I'm finding more and more is that as I work with people, they tell me that they were in the process of actually adding the name to Family Tree when somebody else came along with a name finding app and grabbed the name. Now, imagine how you would feel in that position. You're a new person to family history. You're so excited that you finally found these first couple of names that you're adding, and then somebody comes with an automated program who didn't do any research, doesn't know the family, and just grabbed these names that your heart had been turned to. One sister called me in tears after this happened, so I can tell you how disappointed she was when that happened. And she contacted the person, just sent a very nice email to them and said, "Hey, I was working on this family and was just getting ready to reserve it. My kids needed it for baptisms. Is there any chance that you might be willing to let me have that name?" And the person was really nice about it. They actually had run a name finding app to find like a huge amount of names, which was a bit unfortunate in and of itself. But since they had so many names, they didn't mind giving some names back to my friend. So if you find that the name has been added recently, oh, and by the way you tell when it has been added is you go over to the right-hand side of the person page and you click Show All in the box that lists your latest changes. Then you scroll down to the very bottom of that page and it tells you when that name was added. So if the name was added, I would say within the last few weeks, it's a really nice courtesy to check with the person who added it just to make sure that they're not maybe planning to use it for a Ward Temple night or planning to use the names for their children's baptisms or so forth. It just it's just a really nice courtesy. It's not wrong, it's not against policy, it's not a sin to reserve a name with a green temple. But again, to think of that person's feelings, especially if they're a new person to family history and they've added the name recently, it is just a nice courtesy to check with them. And the way you do that is by sending them a message or by anytime you click that contributor's name, you'll get a little pop-up that will allow you to either email the person or send them a message through the system. So once you've decided that that name is worth checking out, then you want to carefully validate it. You want to resolve any obvious errors, such as, say, a child born before the mother or something like that. You also want to make sure that the person really is related to the person that you're helping. So sometimes as you check through Family Tree, I'll give you an example. A couple of months ago, I was looking at one of the people on my tree. Her name was Ann Dell, and three children showed up for her, which I didn't recognize. And I thought, okay, this is very strange. So I'm going to check these children, and they had green temples by them. Well, come to find out that somebody had added them to Ann Dell but had not looked at the dates. It turned out that they were born several centuries before Anne was born, so they could not possibly be her children. So if I had just clicked those green temples without doing a little bit of verification, I would have done some ordinances for somebody that belonged to a different Andel, and I have no idea if she was related to me. It's possible, but I would have wanted to prove that. And so these kids that had this other Andel as a mother, if I wanted to do those kids, I would have had to verify the relationship going clear back from me to that other Andel. And again, if you're doing a find, take, teach experience, probably you're not going to want to spend time doing that when it will be more of a heart turning experience to find somebody that you can add to Family Tree. So ensure that the person really is related to the person that you're helping, and then also be sure to check for duplicates. I love what my friend Heather says. If I can get this toolbar to disappear, got to keep the mouse still. There we go. She says to think of green temples as an invitation to research. So there's not a problem at all with checking out green temples. If they need the work, by all means, let's do it. But there's so many little things that you need to check first that it's important to make sure that you do that before reserving that green temple name. So now that you've done the heart-turning experience of finding an area of success and finding people that need to be added or finding valid names with green temples, then it's time to actually write down in your lesson plan what you want to help the person do when you meet with them. So again, the consultant planner makes that so easy. I just love how easy this has made it to help people have a heart-turning experience. So under the fan chart in the consultant planner, you'll see this button for create a lesson plan. So you click that button and it brings up a form. You just fill it in right there on the screen, and it's so simple. There are some guidelines that I would recommend as you're doing that lesson plan. So let's just look over those really quickly. First of all, whoops, a little premature there. Let's go back. Okay, first of all, I would plan in the lesson for 30 to 60 minutes. For a while, some of the recommendations about the lesson plan were that they should only be 30 minutes long. But what I've found in dozens of experiences with people is that they almost never want a 30-minute lesson. It's very, very rare in my experience. Generally, the 30-minute time limit is helpful if the person kind of is really hesitant and maybe didn't really want to meet with you, but they're willing to give you 30 minutes. In that case, plan it for 30 and don't go over. But most of the time, people have told me, I just ask them. That's the best way to find out what they're expecting and what they would be comfortable with. I just say, about how long would you want this appointment to be? And they generally would say, let's do an hour. And then when they say that, I stick to that. So if they said an hour, we don't want to be going off to, an hour and a half or 2 hours or something. That's a really good way to turn people off family history. So the next thing that we do, whoops, Okay, the next thing that we do is keep the members' goals in mind. And of course, you will have asked the person their goal as part of setting up the Find, Take, Teach appointment. And if by chance that got skipped somehow, no worries. Just go ahead and give them a phone call, send them an email, and ask for their goal. And actually, you would need that goal before you do all that research that we talked about. Just as an example, one person in my ward, when I talked to her, her goal was, I want to learn the basics of family tree. For her, her learning style was needing to understand the system at least to a degree before clearing temple names. And I respected that. So when I planned her lesson, it didn't have any of that research that I showed you. Instead, it was a lesson plan of what I was going to show her in Family Tree, the tree views, the person page, how to navigate, how to find the temple reservation list, that kind of thing. So keep the members' goals in mind and plan the lesson accordingly. Then keep the lesson at the right level. Now, this is so important. When you go to teach somebody, if they are a beginner, you don't want to be flooding them, fire hosing them with all this detailed information about civil registration in England and blah, 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 just all, stuff that is not even going to sink in. You want to keep the lesson at a very simple level for the beginner so that they don't get overwhelmed and leave them wanting more instead of wishing that we hadn't fire hosed them so much. On the other hand, I've also met with people who are expert researchers, but they're maybe not so familiar with Family Tree. They're familiar with the old PATH program or something. Maybe they did a lot of research before. I had this happen to me where the sister had done a lot of research and then, for various reasons, family issues and so forth, had been pulled away from family history and hadn't done anything for maybe, oh, I don't know, a decade or more. So now she was getting back into family history. She had the expertise, she had the background, she had the skills, but she didn't know the new system. And so for her, I didn't need to oversimplify the research aspect of the lesson, but in other words, I needed to remember that she really did have those skills, but I needed to focus on, put the lesson at the right level for what she needed as far as being new to the system, but an expert in research. And then finally, the last most important thing I would say is don't skip the plan. And you might be saying to yourself, well, duh, of course, I wouldn't skip the plan. But it was so interesting. Mike Sandberg, the great champion of Find, Take, Teach and the consultant planner at FamilySearch, spoke to a training meeting that I actually wasn't able to attend, but I was able to talk to people who attended it afterwards and get some of the handouts. And he mentioned that he had done some follow up on people that were doing Find, Take, Teach. Come to find out that the people were trying to do Find, Take, Teach without following the principles of Find, Take, Teach. Either they were using a name finding app to just grab things, or they weren't doing the lesson plan, they were just kind of winging it, or so forth. And so what he found in his follow up with these people is when they didn't follow the steps of Find, Take, Teach, well, surprise, their Find, Take, Teach wasn't as successful. So it's kind of like, I'm going to build a house, but gosh, I'm not going to follow the blueprint, right? So I'm going to do Find, Take, Teach, but I'm not going to follow the steps. Well, that just doesn't work so well. So if the lesson seems intimidating to you, don't let it be. I would say pray for help. Hopefully, this presentation has been helpful to you. And then just dive in. And you know what, also, brothers and sisters, I can share my testimony with you that as I've written the lesson plan, the Spirit has spoken to me. And I bet that you will find the same thing that as you sit down prayerfully in a quiet place and start writing those steps of what you want to cover with the person you're helping, the Spirit will guide you. And sometimes the guidance I get is, this isn't a good plan. You need to go back and you need to check on something else or find a different way to approach this. And I'm so grateful for that because the Spirit will help me do something that will really help the person. And then there's been other times when I write down that plan and I literally feel the Spirit approving the plan as I do it. So I know that I'm on the right path, and I feel confident. It helps to give me confidence that I really am going to be able to help this person. So my recommendation to you is don't skip the plan, even if it seems like it's going to be challenging. After you do one or two of them, it's going to become a lot easier and a lot less intimidating, and especially as you follow the spirit. And that actually leads us to the well, actually, no, but there's a couple other things. Sorry, there's another slide on following the spirit that we'll get to. But when you click that button to create the lesson plan, you're going to get this blank form. And let's just talk through filling out the fields on the form. So the first one, they're just asking you to give a title to the lesson. And the reason that's helpful is that once you do multiple lessons with a person, then those lessons are going to show up in a list in your consultant planner. So if you give them a title, it's going to be easier for you to tell. And just, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. We've got lesson one here, 18th of June, 2017. So it can be something that simple, or you can put the person's name in it, whatever you would like, but something that will help you identify that lesson. And then put the name of the person or the family being helped. And then finally list that goal so that that's front and center so that it doesn't get forgotten or maybe morphed into something else that wasn't really what the person wanted. So you fill out those pieces of the form. And then this is a slide that I was thinking of earlier. The most important guideline as you're preparing this lesson plan is to seek and rely on the Spirit. And that's one prayer that I found is so much answered is a prayer for the Spirit, especially when you're doing family history. So never skip that step. Always say a prayer for the Spirit and then listen to the promptings that you receive. So with that in mind, then you want to go ahead and write out the plan. And the consultant planner has this wonderful rich text editor which allows you to do bolding and italics. You can change the font size. You can do bullet lists. You can do numbered lists, change the indentation. You can even use this link tool here to create a hyperlink to a source or to a research log or any other web-based item. So this is really a super easy but super effective tool for writing out your lesson plan. Well, you might be saying, okay, that's all very well, but I've never done a lesson plan. Can you show me what one might look like? So here is a lesson plan that I did for a family that I helped in my stake recently. I want to be really clear here, though, that I'm not presenting this as a template that you should always have these 5 points or something like that. I would take this more as this is the lesson plan that I felt inspired to prepare as I sought the Spirit and considered what I had found for that family and their needs and the whole experience of doing Find, Take, Teach for that family. So let me just talk through this really quickly to show you and let you know my thought process as I wrote out this lesson plan. And you notice I did use the little numbers, so I just clicked the number thing in the text editor there in the consultant planner. So the interesting thing about this Find, Take, Teach experience is that I used to teach primary, and one of the girls I had taught in primary is now in Young Women's, and she had contacted me on Facebook saying, "Hey, can you help our family find some names?" So I was thrilled and said, of course, I'd be happy to. And I asked her if she would pray for me as I was doing that research. Sorry, this was just such a sweet experience. And so I asked her if she'd pray for me, and she said she would. And I felt those prayers. I felt her faith as I did that research and found an area of success for her precious family. And so I felt it was important to share my testimony of that as I met with the family. So that was the first step in my lesson plan, was telling the family the role that Farah's faith had played in finding those names. Gosh, I'm sorry. I didn't think I was going to get so emotional over this. It was just such a great experience. So, the next thing I wanted to do was tell the family how I decided on the strategy for research. As I looked at their tree, I saw that it was very full. And so doing ancestral research was not really a good option for this family. Descendancy research was much better. So I followed the process that I showed a little bit earlier in this webinar. I looked at their fan chart, prayed for guidance, did my part to poke around a little bit, looked at people, kind of listened to what I was feeling about different people on the fan chart, and I felt best about focusing on this ancestral couple. So I put that in my lesson plan. And my plan was to actually bring up the fan chart in Family Tree while I met with the family and show them where the ancestral couple fit on their fan chart. And then I also pointed out to them that I stayed in the time period and area most likely to give us success. Then this is something that I think is so important as part of most lessons, and that is to explain to people the data in Family Tree. So many people, I just met with someone last night, have the impression that because Family Tree is an official product of FamilySearch and therefore of the LDS Church, that FamilySearch and or the church have proven or vetted all the names, and that all you're supposed to do is go into Family Tree and harvest names for temple work. Most people don't realize that the names ultimately were all added by other users, and quality runs the gamut. Some of the names are wonderfully sourced and researched. Other names, with the best of intentions, have errors or mistakes or they're duplicates and so forth. So I explained that to them so that they would realize that because so many people wonder, they say, well, if the church has verified all these names, why are you telling me that I shouldn't just go in and click green temples? And so that's why I explained to them where the data in Family Tree comes from. And if you're interested in learning more about that, you can go to the webinar page, the BYU Family History Library webinar page, and just do a search for the webinar called Understanding the Data in Family Tree. That goes into a lot more detail on where the data came from and some of the upsides and downsides of the data. So I explained that, made a definite plan to explain that to the family, and told them that I had decided to focus on finding names to add rather than trying to find green temples in Family Tree. So then I showed them my research. For those of you who have maybe attended some of my other webinars, you know that I use a research log called the Timeline Grid. There's also a webinar on that if you go back to the BYU Family History Library webinar page if you would like more information. So I showed the family my timeline grids that I had prepared while I was doing the research, and the grids all had links to the sources. So I showed them also the sources and then walked through entering the names. And in this particular case, the mom and the daughter had one laptop and the dad and the son had another. And so I had found about 6 names in historical records that could be entered. So the mom and the daughter entered the girls' names, and the dad and the son entered the boys' names right there while we were in the Find Take Teach experience. So it was absolutely wonderful because we ended that Find Take Teach experience with all of them having entered names into Family Tree that we knew were valid. And it was just a wonderful, heart-turning experience. So this sample lesson plan enabled me to plan for that experience and have something meaningful to follow. Now, I feel like I should mention something else. I have a dear friend who, in her lesson plans, she plans on printing them and handing them to the person that she's helping. And she has found that to be very successful. So that's another option is you can print this out with step-by-step instructions for how the person can duplicate what you did to prepare, and then you can leave the printout with them. And that has also been a very heart-turning experience for my friend. So those are the main features that will help you help a person have a heart-turning experience in Find, Take, Teach. What are a few of the other features that we can look at? You can, up at the top above the fan chart, there is a link for understanding recent activity. When you click that link, you get to see the person's last login, their last time that they made a temple reservation, the last time that they added a memory, and also the last time that they added a source. So that's just a kind of nice little thermometer that you can kind of get a pulse of how recently that person has been in Family Tree. Oh, and if you want explanations for any of these things, just click the What is this item. And then the next thing that you can take advantage of, and this only shows up when it's available. So interestingly enough, the other item that or excuse me, the other chart that we looked at for Katrina Beskaby did not have these links. So if you're wondering how you missed them, you didn't miss them. There just weren't any on her chart. But if a person has some additional information that you might want to look at in preparing your lesson plan, then you can click these links. Let's just take a really quick look at each of those 4 links and what they can provide for you. So the information needed link, if you click that, you get this little pop-up that shows people that need more information in Family Tree. Well, that may be a great place to start doing research and finding that missing information. If you click Record Hints, you get a pop-up box that shows you people that have record hints that can be added to them. The great thing about those record hints is that in my experience, those record hints are about 98% accurate. In other words, about 90% of the time in my experience, they are for the person who Family Tree says they're for. Now, once in a while they're not, and that tends to be when we have a name like John Smith in New York, New York, or something like that, where it is harder to match a record to an exact person. But most of the time, those sources really are for the person. So then you just click the source and you add it to, or actually, I'm not positive, I may have misspoken there. You may need to click the person's name, go to their person page, and then add the source from there, and that will show up on the right side of your screen in the record hints box. The great thing about those record hints is when you look at them, when you look at the original record, you may find more people that you can help your person add to Family Tree. There's also a link for featured records. So when you click on that link, you get this nifty page here that shows you a number of featured records that can be added. So you would just click attach and then it would take you, I believe, to the source linker and you can add those records and verify that they're really for the person and then add them to that person in Family Tree. And then finally, there's a memorial page. And these memorials tend to be things like tombstone markers and things like that. So in this case, I see that there's a tombstone marker for this Leland John Byers, and I can go ahead and click view photo and stories, or I can view the burial record, and then I can decide if I want to attach that. Most likely, you're going to want to save it for the person that you're going to be helping. And then just you can make a note of that in your lesson plan if you want to cover that with the person that you're helping. And the last thing that is at the bottom of the page is a place where you can track progress. And you might say, well, what do they mean by tracking progress in the consultant planner? Basically, all it means is you have this option to create a note, which is wonderful. So you click create note, and because nobody sees the planner but you can write down anything that you want there that will help you help that person. So you don't need to be worried about somebody else seeing the note. For instance, you might want to write something, maybe if the person's really a beginner, you might want to write, on our first lesson, they maybe struggled a little bit with the concept of the data in Family Tree. So in the next lesson, I need to show them a different view of or the tree or whatever, whatever notes you want to make. But you can make those notes in confidence, knowing that you can write them down and that nobody's going to see them but you, but they will be notes that can help you help that person in the future. And there is one more thing that is that worth mentioning, and that is that at the top of the screen, you've got a link to Understand Your Calling. And what this does is take you to the FamilySearch blog, which has a wonderful series on effectively implementing Find, Take, Teach. So I promised in closing just very quickly to show you a couple of items that you can use the consultant planner for in addition to Find, Take, Teach. And they're basically very similar. It's just not a formal Find, Take, Teach experience. So one thing that you can do, and I don't remember who first told me about this, but I thought it was a great idea, is that you can invite yourself. And then that gives you access to those wonderful tools in the planner. So you can view the useful fan charts for yourself. That way you get to see the countries and the birth years, which I don't know of any other easy way to do that except in the planner. And the planner shows you 6 generations on the fan chart instead of just 4, as is typical in Family Tree. So that's an advantage for just doing your own research. And then those links that we just looked over, those memorial links and source links and so forth, that gives you access to those links as well. And then you can also use notes to track your own progress. So you just invite yourself using the same method that you use to invite anybody else. And then, if you choose the email one, when you get the email, just authorize it. Or if you want to enter your helper information, just put it in and you'll show up as a person on your own list of people in your planner. So I personally have found that to be a really awesome functionality. And then the other thing that you can do is that you can help friends and family. So, for instance, I've got friends in my old ward in California that know that I love family history, so occasionally they'll ask me for help. Well, it's not really a formal find, take, teach experience because I'm not their family history consultant, and maybe they don't want, a formal find, take, teach experience. They just want me to help them out, with something. Would you check the relationship between my great grandmother and my great great grandmother? I think something's a little wonky there, or whatever. So by adding them to the planner, it gives me quick and easy access to their tree and family tree, or in other words, I see it the way they would see it. And so then I can help them more effectively. Or you might just have a friend who wants to get started and doesn't want anything formal, but they are willing to have you take a look at their tree. Well, this is a really easy way to do that. So, in summary, we covered an introduction to the consultant planner, including how to add people and invite people so they show up on your planner. We also talked about how the consultant planner supports Find, Take, Teach, mainly through giving you great tools to see the person's tree so that you can find an area of success, and then also in preparing a lesson plan, and then those other miscellaneous features we talked about. And then also you can use the consultant planner for experiences that technically wouldn't be a find, take, teach experience, but they're still you helping another person or doing your own research. So that concludes our webinar for today. I just wanted to leave you with a closing quote from Mike Sandberg, which I absolutely love. He says that as part of the find, take, teach process, family history helpers seek to apply proven principles, which we've talked about today, to create heart-turning experiences for the people they help. These experiences help others love family history and ultimately become saviors on Mount Zion. I don't know of a more powerful experience than having our hearts turned to our family. And it's my prayer that as you participate in using the consultant planner, that you'll experience that and help the people that you're helping to experience that as well. So that concludes our webinar for today. And Sean, do we have any questions that we need to cover?
We do actually have three, so I guess I'll go ahead and ask you the first one. The first
Great.
question is there a way to share the family tree without seeing living people?
That is such a great question. There actually isn't, and that is not through the permission method. So if you invite somebody or add somebody, you are going to see any living information that they could see. So it probably is a good thing to let the person know that. Most people I've talked to don't have a concern about that, but there was a woman in my ward in California who did have a concern. She had been through a horrible divorce and was concerned for the safety of her children, and she just was really, really cautious about letting anybody, family history consultant or whoever, see living information. So the thing that you can do in that case, if you run across a person who is very concerned and doesn't want to share living information, then ask them to give you the first IDs of the deceased people on their tree. And I actually did that with a friend just the other day too. And so she gave me the IDs, I think it was of all the grandparents, if I'm not mistaken, because in her case, it was actually for her husband, all the grandparents were deceased. But if they weren't, if a grandparent was still alive, in that case, you would just ask for the ID number of the great grandparent or whoever was the first deceased person. So, very, very good question. And again, in today's world, you can't be too careful, and we definitely want to respect people not wanting to give visibility to living information. Thank you for that great question.
Okay, the second one is a little longer. It says, "My understanding is that family search is to create a correct record for every person who has ever lived and make sure they are correctly connected to all their relatives, and for church members to take that information and perform temple ordinances for their appropriate family members. But from your comment about the purpose of family search, I may be overstating the purpose of family search. Could you clarify on your comment a bit of what you think the purpose is?"
Oh, thank you for that question. And if I gave the impression that what you said was not correct, I apologize because I loved your summary that you gave right there. I thought that was spot on, that the purpose is to create accurate records, link them to other people by correct relationships, and do temple work. So if there was something that I said that caused you to feel that I didn't agree with that, I would love to hear more information and maybe I could clarify what I said on that. So, Sean, maybe we could go to the third question, and the person who was concerned about that could possibly provide some clarification on what I said that made them think that I didn't think that was the purpose of Family Tree.
Okay, yeah, perfect. The third question is, "I have also found that finding a historical record of a close family relative and having the person closely examine that record and put themselves in the place of that ancestor has had a tremendous impact on feeling the spirit, even though a name was not found. What are your feelings about this?"
Oh my goodness, I love that. I really, really love that. And I'll tell you a couple of reasons why I love it. And I think it's spot on, is that number one, I've had the same experience. So I can add my testimony that that's absolutely true. And then the other reason is that it turns hearts. It helps the person connect with that person and the person you're helping connect with the person in the historical record. And it also, one thing about looking at historical records is a lot of times you'll find information on those records that doesn't appear on the summary, the typewritten summary of the record. So for instance, you might be looking at a marriage record, and to actually look at that record and see the signature of the person, that you would have had no way of knowing that that signature was on there without seeing the actual record. That's a huge heart-turning experience. Also, to see witnesses' names, for instance, in the case of a marriage record. So yes, I love that. And I think that sometimes you asked, what about if we don't find a name from doing that? And do you know what? Yes, it's important to find names, but sometimes I think we're almost emphasizing that a little bit too much, where we cut corners in order to quote find a name. And I don't think there's anything wrong with taking a little bit more time and actually letting people feel close to their ancestors by looking at historical records. And oh yeah, I remembered another thing I was going to say. One thing, unfortunately, sometimes historical records have gotten a bad reputation. People call them boring, or people say, oh, you don't want to do that. That will scare people away, or whatever. That, I think, comes from the days when we had to always use microfilm. And so not only did you have to know how to load the microfilm in the reader, then you had to roll the film till your arm just about dropped off and you didn't always find what you're looking for because you couldn't search it, whatever. So historical sources did get kind of a bad reputation from the days of microfilm, but today they're digitized. And so you do a quick search, and within seconds, you've found a record that you bring up in the comfort of your home on your iPad, whatever, that you can very, very easily look at. You can sometimes see the person's own handwriting. You learn things about what that person went through. Sorry, you guys, just another really quick thing. I remember one time I brought up a 1911 English census, and this family, I think, probably prompted by the spirit of Elijah. You know that usually on censuses you're not supposed to list deceased children, but this precious family had lost 5 of their 7 children, but they listed all of them on the census. And looking at that census record brought me to tears and made me feel so close to that family. And it let me know that they loved those kids and that they wanted those kids with them. And so, yeah, historical records, I think, are a wonderful way to turn hearts, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. That's just my opinion. So, do we have any other questions? Was the person able to clarify the thing that I may have misstated? Sean, are you able to hear me?
Oh yeah, sorry, I had mine on mute. So that's as many questions as I've received so far. And then the response to the
Okay,
second
sounds
one says perhaps I just heard you incorrectly. So it might have just been unclear maybe
or I could
between.
Yeah, I could have totally misspoken, and I very much apologize. I noticed at the beginning I was kind of stumbling around a little bit as I kind of, got my footing at the beginning of the webinar. So I apologize for anything I misstated, and just know that I totally agreed with what you said, the second questioner. And also, you notice my email address is here on the screen, and so if anybody does have further questions or would like further clarification, please do feel free to shoot me an email. So thank you very much.
Okay, perfect. So that will conclude today's webinar. Thank you so much, Kathryn, for your wonderful insight. It was a fantastic opportunity to listen to that presentation. I'd like to remind everybody that this will be uploaded to YouTube in the next hour or so. If you'd like to rewatch some of the information and go over it with some other people or to share it with your friends and family, that's a great place to do that is on our YouTube channel, which is the BYU Family History Library channel. And again, we'd like to thank you for joining us today. And our next webinar will be on Tuesday of next week. So feel free to join us for that one. All right, thanks so much.